A cursed Omega thought he was saving an abandoned pup on a blood moon night. Its tiny body trembled in his scarred hands, its silver eyes pleading for warmth. He carried it through forbidden woods, wrapped it against his chest, and whispered promises of protection. But as the moon waxed, unnatural signs emerged. Eyes that glowed with ancient power, a howl that cracked stone, markings that shimmered and vanished on midnight fur. Terrified, he sought answers. The moment Alpha King Duskfang took the pup in his palm, the creature shifted. The most powerful werewolf in the realm turned pale, his hands trembling as he whispered the truth. What the Omega had rescued wasn't an ordinary pup at all, and the revelation would shake every pack in existence.
So you just heard what's coming: an Omega, a mysterious pup, and an Alpha King who turns pale at what he discovers. But before I reveal how this all began, answer me this. What would you do if you found a mysterious creature that didn't belong to this world? Would you risk everything to save it, or would fear make you walk away? Drop your answer in the comments right now and tell me where you're watching from. And listen, if you don't hit that subscribe button immediately, you're gonna miss the most shocking twists coming in this story. Because this story is about to get darker and more intense than you can imagine, and you do not want to miss a single moment. Don't let this be the last epic tale you see from me. Subscribe now before you forget.
The blood moon had just begun to rise as Kael trudged through the cursed woods, his exile forcing him down paths no wolf dared travel. A pitiful whimper at the base of a ruined oak caught his attention there. Barely visible in the crimson shadows lay what appeared to be a tiny wolf pup with fur black as a moonless night and eyes like liquid silver. Unable to leave any creature to suffer the same abandonment he'd endured, Kael rescued the fragile pup, cradling it against his scarred chest and carrying it to his hidden sanctuary, unaware that this single act of compassion would unravel an ancient prophecy and force him to make a choice between his heart and the fate of their entire world. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, painting the cursed woods in shades of crimson and shadow. Kael moved through the undergrowth with practiced silence, his footsteps careful on ground where even the bravest wolves refused to tread. 3 months since his exile, 3 months of surviving on scraps and silence, of rubbing pungent herbs into his skin to mask the Omega scent that marked him as weak, as cursed, as unworthy. The twisted trees reached toward him like gnarled fingers, their branches bare despite the season. Ancient runes carved into their bark glowed faintly in the moonlight, warnings from a time before the packs, before the territories, before everything had fractured into endless conflict and betrayal. He should keep moving. The blood moon brought out things that hunted in darkness, drew power from old magic better left sleeping. But then he heard it, a sound so pitiful it stopped him cold. A whimper, soft, desperate, utterly alone. Kael's heart clenched despite his better judgment. He knew that sound. He'd made it himself, on his knees before the Pack Council, when they'd pronounced his sentence and marked his skin with the witch's dying curse. When they'd driven him into these woods to die slowly, forgotten by everyone who'd once called him brother. He found the source beneath the oldest oak, the one whose trunk bore scars deeper and more intricate than any other. There, nestled between roots that twisted like serpents, lay a tiny wolf pup. Its fur was black as a moonless night, so dark it seemed to absorb the crimson light rather than reflect it. But its eyes, those enormous silver eyes, looked up at him with an intelligence no newborn pup should possess, glowing with something ancient and desperate and utterly terrifying. The pup shivered violently, its small body racked with tremors. It bore no pack scent, only the faint smell of magic and something else he couldn't name. Abandoned, just as he had been. Left to die in a place where death came slowly and with great suffering. Kael's hands moved before his mind could stop them. His scarred fingers, marked with the swirling patterns of his curse, reached down and lifted the trembling creature. The moment his skin touched its fur, his curse marks flared with sudden light, a searing pain that made him gasp. followed immediately by a warmth he hadn't felt since before his exile. The pup pressed against his chest, its heartbeat rapid and fragile against his palm. Something inside Kael's broken heart stirred. Cracked open just enough to let in one dangerous truth. He couldn't leave this creature to suffer alone. Even if it destroyed him, he would save it. Kael's sanctuary was barely more than a cave carved into the hillside, hidden behind a waterfall that had long since dried to a trickle. But it was his, and more importantly, it was safe. He ducked through the narrow entrance, cradling the pup carefully against his chest, and immediately set about building up the dying embers of his fire. The pup whimpered as he laid it on the worn fur that served as his bedding. In the flickering firelight, Kael could see it more clearly now, ribs showing through midnight fur, small cuts along its legs, dirt matted into its coat. But beneath the neglect, there was something else. Something that made his curse marks tingle with recognition. He reached for his meager collection of herbs, fingers sorting through dried leaves and roots he'd gathered from the safer edges of the cursed woods. Yarrow for wounds, chamomile for fever, willow bark for pain. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he crushed and mixed, adding hot water from the pot that always hung near his fire. The bitter scent filled the small space, familiar and almost comforting. The pup watched him with those unsettling silver eyes, tracking his every movement with an awareness that sent chills down his spine. No ordinary pup should look at someone like that as if seeing through skin and bone to the broken soul beneath. Kael approached slowly, offering the carved wooden bowl he'd made during his first lonely weeks of exile. The pup sniffed cautiously, then began to drink, its small pink tongue lapping at the healing brew. Relief washed through Kael as the pup drank deeply, its trembling gradually subsiding. When the bowl was empty, Kael used a damp cloth to clean the worst of the dirt and dried blood from the pup's fur. His touch was gentle, more gentle than he'd been with anything in months. The pup submitted to his care without protest, occasionally making small sounds that weren't quite whimpers, weren't quite growls, something in between that he'd never heard before. As the moon climbed higher, Kael settled against the cave wall with the pup tucked against his scarred chest. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across stone walls. The pup's breathing had evened out, its small body finally warm and fed and safe. For the first time since his exile, Kael felt something other than emptiness. The hollow ache that had consumed him began to fill with something dangerous, something he'd sworn never to feel again: hope. He looked down at the sleeping creature, at fur so black it seemed to swallow light, at those closed eyes that hid such disturbing intelligence. Under the moon's watchful gaze streaming through the cave entrance, Kael whispered a name that felt both right and terrifying. "Ember, I'll call you Ember." The pup stirred at the sound, pressing closer against his chest. And for one brief, fragile moment, Kael allowed himself to believe he wasn't alone anymore. The first sign came 3 nights after Kael brought Ember home. He woke to find the cave flooded with pale silver light, his heart hammering as he reached for the crude knife he kept beneath his bedding. But there was no intruder, no threat, only Ember, sitting at the cave entrance, eyes blazing like twin moons in the darkness. The light wasn't reflected. It came from within, pulsing with each of the pup's breaths, illuminating the stone walls in shifting patterns that reminded Kael of the ancient runes carved into the oak where he'd found her. When Ember turned to look at him, those glowing eyes held a weight that made his curse marks burn. He should have been terrified. Instead, he felt an inexplicable pull, as if something deep within him recognized what he was seeing, even if his mind couldn't comprehend it. By the second week, Ember's movements had become impossibly fluid. Kael watched in stunned silence as the pup, still small enough to fit in his cupped hands, launched itself at a rabbit that had wandered too close to the sanctuary. The speed was unnatural, a blur of black fur and flashing teeth that moved faster than any wolf pup should. The rabbit didn't even have time to flee. Ember returned to him with the kill, dropping it at his feet with a proud little chirp that sounded nothing like a wolf's cry. More like something ancient, something that predated the packs and their hierarchies and all their carefully constructed rules. Then came the howl. It happened during the waning moon, when Kael was teaching Ember to track scent trails through the underbrush. Without warning, the pup threw back its head and released a sound that split the air like thunder. The very earth seemed to shudder, and Kael watched in horror as a crack appeared in the boulder beside them, spiderwebbing across its surface with a sound like breaking bones. The howl echoed through the cursed woods, carrying a note of such profound loneliness and power that every creature within hearing distance fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kael dropped to his knees, his curse marks flaring with agonizing intensity. But beneath the pain came something else, a strange, cooling relief, as if Ember's power was somehow balancing the curse that had tormented him for months. His marks glowed in response to the pup's cry, pulsing in rhythm with that impossible sound. When the howl finally faded, Ember padded over to him, seeming exhausted but unharmed. And there, shimmering across the pup's midnight fur, Kael saw them glowing symbols that hadn't been there before. They looked like the runes from the oak, but older, more intricate, written in a language he'd never learned but somehow understood in his bones. He reached out with trembling fingers to trace the markings. They felt warm beneath his touch, humming with power. But even as he watched, they began to fade, sinking back beneath Ember's fur like secrets returning to the deep. Kael pulled the pup close, his heart torn between wonder and a fear he couldn't name. What had he brought into his sanctuary? The whispers reached Kael through Ceres, his former packmate who still dared to venture into the cursed woods despite the council's warnings. She appeared at dawn, her rust-colored fur streaked with mud, her amber eyes wide with fear. "They're talking about you," she said without preamble, keeping her distance from the cave entrance. "The whole pack. Some say you've taken a demon as a companion. Others claim you're practicing blood magic to break your curse." Kael's stomach dropped. He'd been so careful, only venturing out when the moon was dark, always masking his scent, never straying far from the sanctuary. But of course word had spread. In a world of wolves, secrets never stayed buried for long. "There's more," Ceres continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Rogues have been asking questions at the territory borders. Wolves with no pack allegiance, searching for something. They mentioned an Omega in the cursed woods, and a creature of old magic." She took a step closer, her expression pleading. "Kael, whatever you've found, whatever you're protecting, it's drawing attention you can't afford." Before he could respond, Ember emerged from the cave, moving with that unnatural grace that always made Kael's breath catch. Ceres went rigid, her ears flattening against her skull as she caught sight of the pup. Even in daylight, Ember's silver eyes seemed to glow, and the air around the small creature shimmered with barely contained power. "By the old laws," Ceres breathed, "what is that?" Ember growled, a sound far too deep and resonant for such a small body. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, and Ceres stumbled backward, instinct overriding loyalty. "I'm sorry, Kael. I'm so sorry." She turned and fled, disappearing into the trees with the desperate speed of prey. Over the following days, Kael began to notice them, shadows moving along the ridgelines, unfamiliar scents carried on the wind. Wolves who didn't belong to his old pack, who moved with the calculated patience of hunters who'd found their quarry's trail. He counted at least 5 distinct scents, maybe more. They never came close enough for him to see clearly, but he felt their eyes watching, assessing, waiting. At night, he caught glimpses of glowing eyes among the trees, forming a loose circle around his sanctuary that tightened incrementally with each passing hour. Ember sensed them too. The pup stayed close now, hackles constantly raised, emitting low growls that made the cave walls vibrate. The markings appeared more frequently on Ember's fur. glowing bright enough to read by in the darkness. As if responding to the approaching threat, Kael sat by the dying fire, ember pressed against his side, and faced the truth he'd been avoiding. They couldn't hide here forever. The cursed woods had been his refuge, but they were becoming his trap. Whatever Ember was, whatever power the pup carried, it was calling to forces far beyond his understanding or ability to resist. The hunters were closing in, and Kael had no idea how to protect the one creature that had given his cursed existence meaning. They came at midnight, when the moon hung like a silver blade in the sky. Kael sensed them before he saw them, a presence so overwhelming it made his Omega instincts scream at him to submit, to bow, to bare his throat. The air itself seemed to thicken with dominance, pressing down on him like a physical weight. Then the Alpha King stepped into the clearing. Duskfang was massive, his wolf form towering over any creature Kael had ever seen. His fur was the color of storm clouds, silver and gray streaked with black, and his eyes burned with an amber fire that had watched empires rise and fall. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle and shoulders, not marks of defeat, but trophies of battles won, of challenges survived, of absolute power maintained for longer than most wolves lived. Behind him, elite guards emerged from the shadows, 6 of them, each handpicked from the strongest warriors across all territories. They moved with synchronized precision, forming a perfect circle around Kael's sanctuary, cutting off every possible escape route. Kael stood at the cave entrance, his body positioned protectively in front of Ember. His legs trembled with the effort of resisting the Alpha command that radiated from Duskfang like heat from a forge, but he held his ground. Inside the cave, he could hear Ember's growl building, that otherworldly sound that made stones crack and earth shudder. "Step aside, Omega." Duskfang's voice was like grinding granite, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I have no quarrel with you. I've come for the creature you harbor." "No." The word left Kael's mouth before he could think better of it, before his Omega nature could strangle his defiance. "You can't have her." Something flickered in Duskfang's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that a cursed Omega would dare refuse an Alpha King. The guards tensed, muscles coiling beneath fur, ready to strike at their leader's command. "I am not asking," Kael of the Shadow Ridge Pack. Duskfang took a step forward, his presence intensifying until Kael's vision blurred at the edges. "Show me the creature, now." Kael's curse marks erupted with pain, responding to the Alpha command with a violence that drove him to his knees. But even as agony tore through his body, even as blood began to seep from the glowing symbols carved into his skin, he raised his head and met Duskfang's burning gaze. "You'll have to kill me first." Before Duskfang could respond, Ember exploded from the cave entrance. The pup was barely larger than Kael's hand, but the power that emanated from that small body made every wolf in the clearing stagger backward. Ember's eyes blazed with silver fire, and the markings across her fur ignited like captured lightning. Her snarl shook the trees, sent rocks tumbling from the hillside, cracked the earth beneath their feet. The elite guards fell into defensive positions, but Duskfang remained motionless. His eyes locked on Ember with an expression Kael had never expected to see on the face of the most powerful Alpha alive. Fear. Raw, undiluted fear mixed with something else: recognition, wonder, and a grief so profound it seemed to age him centuries in a single moment. "Impossible," Duskfang whispered, his commanding voice reduced to barely audible breath. "It cannot be." 2 guards lunged forward and seized Kael's arms, dragging him away from the cave despite his struggles. He fought with everything he had, screaming Ember's name, but Omega strength was nothing against warriors chosen by the Alpha King himself. Duskfang approached Ember slowly, each step measured and careful, as if approaching something sacred or deadly or both. He shifted as he walked, his massive wolf form condensing into the shape of a man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that still burned with that terrible amber fire. "Come," he said softly, extending one scarred hand toward the snarling pup. Let me see what you truly are. Ember stared at Duskfang's outstretched hand for a long moment, silver eyes blazing with intelligence far beyond any pup's understanding. Then, slowly, as if making a conscious choice, the small creature stepped forward and allowed the Alpha King to lift her. Kael watched, held fast by the guards, his heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs might crack. Ember looked impossibly small, cradled in Duskfang's scarred palm, vulnerable in a way that made Kael's protective instincts scream. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the air began to shimmer. It started as a subtle distortion, like heat waves rising from sun-baked stone. But the shimmer intensified, spreading outward from Ember's small body in ripples of pure silver light. The markings on her fur ignited, blazing so bright that everyone in the clearing had to shield their eyes. Kael felt his curse marks respond, burning with an intensity that stole his breath. But through the pain, through the blinding light, he watched as Ember's form began to shift. The transformation was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. Most wolves took years to master their first shift, struggling through painful, awkward attempts before achieving fluidity. But Ember moved between forms as easily as breathing, as if the barrier between shapes was nothing more than a suggestion. For just a moment, a single, crystalline moment, the pup's true nature was revealed. The small wolf form dissolved into something older, something that existed before the packs had divided into territories and hierarchies. And there, blazing across what should have been unmarked fur, appeared a symbol that made every wolf in the clearing fall silent. A silver crescent moon, perfect and luminous, surrounded by shadow runes that seemed to writhe and pulse with their own dark life. The mark of the shadow moon bloodline. Duskfang's face drained of all color. His hand trembled, and for the first time in his legendary reign, the Alpha King looked fragile, ancient, utterly shaken. His lips moved soundlessly before he finally found his voice. "Impossible," he breathed. "The shadow moon air lives." The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the assembled wolves. The elite guards exchanged glances of disbelief and dawning horror. One of them, an elder with grizzled fur and milky eyes, stepped forward, his voice cracking with emotion. "The prophecy," the elder whispered, and suddenly his eyes cleared, blazing with an inner sight that spoke of visions and ancient knowledge. His voice rose, taking on a resonance that echoed through the cursed woods. "The last of the blood will rise when all seems lost. The heir will stand at the crossroads between unity and vengeance, between healing and destruction. Their choice will determine whether the packs unite as one, or burn in the fires of retribution for sins long buried." Kael's world tilted violently. The shadow moon bloodline. He'd heard the stories, the whispered legends of the pack that had been betrayed and slaughtered generations ago. Every wolf pup learned the tale as a warning about the dangers of ambition and treachery. But everyone believed the bloodline extinct, wiped out completely in a single night of coordinated violence across multiple territories. Everyone had been wrong. Ember shifted back into her pup form, the blazing markings fading beneath midnight fur once more. But now Kael understood why his curse had responded to her presence. Why the witch's dying spell had burned so fiercely when he'd touched her. His curse wasn't a punishment at all. It was a beacon, a call meant to draw the one wolf desperate enough, broken enough, selfless enough to protect the last shadow moon heir until the time came for truth to be revealed. Duskfang slowly lowered Ember back to the ground, his expression a complicated mixture of reverence and dread. When he finally looked up at Kael, still held by the guards, his amber eyes held a terrible weight. "Do you understand what you've done, Omega? What you've protected?" Kael met his gaze, fear and pride warring in his chest. "I saved a life, that's all I know." "You've saved the future," Duskfang said quietly, "or doomed us all."
Wait, stop right here. The prophecy has been revealed, and everything just changed. Kael now knows that Ember could either save or destroy every pack in existence. So answer me this. If you had to choose between protecting someone you love and potentially dooming your entire world, what would you do? Comment your answer below. I'm reading every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Hit that subscribe button right now because the impossible choice is coming and you cannot miss what happens next. Seriously, subscribe before you regret it.
Duskfang's war room was carved into the heart of his fortress, a chamber of stone and shadow lit by torches that cast dancing flames across walls covered in ancient maps and faded tapestries. Kael stood before a massive table strewn with texts so old their pages crumbled at the slightest touch, his wrists still bound despite the Alpha King's assurances that he was no longer a prisoner. Ember sat at his feet, unusually quiet, as if she too sensed the weight of what was about to be revealed. 53 years ago, Duskfang began, his voice heavy with a grief that decades hadn't diminished. The Shadow Moon Pack was the strongest in all territories. They held the sacred grounds where the first wolves learned to shift, where the ancient laws were written. Their bloodline carried magic in its purest form, the ability to bridge worlds, to speak with the earth itself, to maintain balance between all packs. He pulled forward a leather-bound tome, its cover stained with something dark that Kael recognized as blood. Inside were illustrations of wolves bearing the crescent moon mark, their eyes blazing with silver fire. That power made them dangerous, made them a threat to those who craved control without responsibility, dominance without wisdom. Duskfang's jaw tightened. 7 packs conspired in secret. They came during the Convergence Moon, when the Shadow Moon wolves gathered for their sacred ceremony. They came with silver and fire and betrayal. Kael's stomach turned as Duskfang revealed page after page of documentation, testimonies, confessions extracted through torture, maps showing the coordinated attack. It hadn't been a battle. It had been an execution. They killed everyone. Alpha, elders, warriors, mothers, pups, everyone who carried the bloodline. Duskfang's voice cracked slightly. I was young then, newly ascended. My father was one of the conspirators. I didn't know until it was too late to stop it. The Alpha King's amber eyes met Kael's. And in them, Kael saw a guilt that had festered for half a century. The last to die was their eldest witch, Morgana Shadow Moon. As she bled out on sacred ground, she cast a final spell, a curse that would hide the last surviving heir until a guardian worthy of protecting them appeared. A wolf who understood suffering, who knew abandonment, who would choose compassion over self-preservation. Kael's curse marks burned as understanding crashed over him like a drowning wave. The witch cursed me to find Ember? She cursed you to become the only wolf who could save her bloodline. Duskfang gestured to Kael's glowing marks. Every moment of your suffering, every day of your exile, was the spell preparing you, breaking you down so you could be rebuilt as something stronger than pack loyalty, fiercer than survival instinct. The curse drew you to the cursed woods, guided your steps to that ruined oak, ensured you would choose to save rather than walk away. Tears burned in Kael's eyes. 3 months of agony, of loneliness so complete he'd considered ending his own life. All of it had been orchestrated by a dying witch's desperate gamble. But why me? His voice broke. I'm nothing. A weak Omega. You're exactly what she needed. Duskfang's expression softened slightly. Someone the packs had cast aside. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Someone who would love that pup fiercely enough to die for her. He pulled forward another scroll. This one bearing fresh ink. Word of Ember's survival has already spread. The 7 packs, who orchestrated the massacre, their descendants now control most territories. Some want Ember dead before she can claim her birthright. Others want her controlled, weaponized, used to legitimize their own power. Very few care about the truth, about justice, about what the Shadow Moon Pack actually stood for. Kael looked down at Ember. who gazed back with those impossibly wise silver eyes. His heart shattered and reformed around a terrible understanding. He hadn't saved her from death in the cursed woods. He'd saved her for something far more dangerous, a destiny that would force her to judge the sins of their entire world. "What happens now?" he whispered. Duskfang's expression was grim. "Now we prepare for the convergence moon. Every pack will gather, as tradition demands. And Ember will undergo her first shift ceremony before them all." He paused, the weight of prophecy settling over the room like a shroud. "And then she will choose unity or vengeance, forgiveness or fire." Kael pulled Ember close, his curse marks pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. His suffering had always had purpose. He just wished that purpose didn't require breaking both their hearts. The convergence moon would rise in 3 days. Kael could feel it approaching like a physical pressure, the air growing thick with anticipation and dread. Throughout Duskfang's fortress, preparations consumed everyone, ceremonial grounds cleared, ancient stones arranged in patterns older than memory, representatives from every pack arriving with suspicion carved into their faces. Kael found the scroll in the restricted section of Duskfang's library, hidden behind texts on forbidden magic. His hands trembled as he unrolled the ancient parchment, recognizing immediately what it described. A binding ritual, dark, powerful, irreversible. It would tie his life force to Ember's, create an unbreakable bond that would hide them both from every seeking spell, every prophecy, every destiny. They could disappear into the cursed woods and live out their days together, hidden from the world and its demands. All it required was blood, moonlight, and the willingness to sacrifice everything they might have been for the safety of what they were. He read it 3 times, committing every word to memory, before his curse marks flared with warning pain. The witch's spell recognized what he was considering, recognized the temptation to run, to hide, to choose love over purpose. Outside, Ember played near the moonlit pool in the fortress gardens, chasing fireflies with the innocent joy of any pup. She'd grown in the weeks since the revelation, her movements more coordinated, her power more controlled. But she was still so small, still so young. Too young to bear the weight of prophecy, to stand before hostile packs and make choices that would define generations. How could he let her face that? How could he doom her to a destiny written in the blood of her slaughtered family? "You found it, then?" Kael spun to find Duskfang standing in the garden entrance, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "I wondered if you would," the Alpha King continued, moving to stand beside Kael. "That scroll has existed for centuries, used by those desperate enough to escape fate itself. You knew it was there." Accusation colored Kael's voice. "I wanted you to have a choice, a real one." Duskfang's gaze fixed on Ember, something like longing flickering across his ancient features. "If you perform that ritual, I will not stop you. I will tell the assembled packs that the heir is dead, that the prophecy was false. I will protect your escape with my life." The offer hung between them, terrible in its generosity. "Why?" Kael's voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" "Because I failed the Shadow Moon pack once. I was too young, too weak to stand against my father and the other conspirators." Duskfang's jaw tightened. "I have lived with that failure for 53 years. If you choose to save Ember from the same fate I couldn't prevent for her family, I will honor that choice." Kael looked at the scroll, then at Ember, then at the moon, climbing steadily toward its convergence. 2 futures sprawled before him with terrible clarity. One where they ran, where he bound them together and fled into darkness, keeping Ember safe and innocent, and his. They would live quietly, hidden from destiny and duty. She would never know the burden of her bloodline, never face the wolves who killed her family. But she would also never know who she truly was, never claim her birthright, never fulfill the purpose her entire bloodline had died protecting. The other where he let her go, where he stood beside her before the assembled packs and allowed prophecy to unfold as it must. She would face danger, hatred, impossible choices. She might die. She might choose vengeance and burn the world. But she would be free to become what she was meant to be, to write her own story rather than hide from it. Kael closed his eyes, feeling his curse marks pulse with the rhythm of his breaking heart. He'd spent 3 months believing his suffering was meaningless. But Morgana's spell hadn't just prepared him to save Ember's life. It had prepared him to make this choice to love something more than he loved having it. When he opened his eyes, Duskfang was watching him with understanding. "I'll need formal robes for the ceremony," Kael said quietly, "and someone to teach me the proper words." The Alpha King nodded, grief and pride mingling in his expression. "It will be done." Kael walked to the pool's edge where Ember splashed happily in the shallows. He knelt beside her, running his fingers through her damp fur one last time before everything changed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, "for what's coming, for what I'm about to ask of you." Ember looked up at him with those impossibly wise silver eyes and placed one small paw on his hand, as if she'd always known, as if she'd been waiting for him to understand. The convergence moon rose like a promise and a threat, bathing the ancient ceremonial grounds in silver fire. Hundreds of wolves filled the sacred circle alphas and their elite guards, elders bearing the weight of decades, warriors whose scars told stories of territorial wars and blood feuds. The air crackled with tension so thick Kael could taste it, metallic and sharp like lightning about to strike. He walked through the center of it all, Ember at his side, every eye burning into him with suspicion or hatred or desperate curiosity. His formal robes felt foreign against his scarred skin, the ceremonial markings painted across his face doing nothing to hide what he was, a cursed Omega who had no right to stand before such power. But he walked with his head high, his hand resting gently on Ember's back, feeling her small heart beating rapidly beneath midnight fur. The assembled alphas sat on elevated stones arranged in a semicircle, their faces carved from shadow and judgment. Kael recognized some from the histories Duskfang had shown him, descendants of the conspirators, wearing their ancestors' sins like inherited crowns. Duskfang rose from his central position, his voice carrying across the gathered wolves with commanding authority. "You have been summoned to witness what many believed impossible. The last heir of the Shadow Moon bloodline lives." The crowd erupted. Snarls of disbelief, howls of outrage, shocked silence from those too stunned to respond. An alpha with rust-colored fur and cruel eyes stood, his voice dripping with venom. "This is a trick, a desperate ploy by an Omega and his demon pet to gain power they'll never deserve." Others joined in, their accusations building like a storm. Kael felt Ember tense beside him, felt the power gathering beneath her small form like thunder waiting to break. But he placed a steadying hand on her head and stepped forward. "I am Kael, once of Shadow Ridge Pack, cast out and cursed." His voice should have been lost in the chaos, but somehow it carried, clear and unwavering. "I found this pup abandoned in the cursed woods, dying and alone. I didn't know what she was. I only knew she needed someone to choose her when everyone else had chosen to look away." He met the eyes of the assembled alphas, one by one, refusing to bow beneath their dominance. "You want to control her destiny before she's old enough to understand it. You want to use her, or kill her, or mold her into whatever serves your interests. But I stand here to tell you that Ember is not yours to command. She belongs to herself, to her own choices, to the future she will create when she's ready." An Omega speaks of choices? The rust-colored alpha laughed bitterly. "You have no authority here. No voice that matters. He has mine." Duskfang's words cut through the assembly like a blade. "This Omega has done what none of you could, protected the heir when it cost him everything. He has earned his voice." Before more could be said, Ember stepped forward. The small pup moved to the center of the ceremonial circle, and suddenly the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The convergence moon reached its apex. and Ember tilted her head back to meet its light. The transformation was magnificent. Power erupted from her small form in waves of silver and shadow, her body shifting with a grace that spoke of ancient magic awakening. The crescent moon mark blazed across her fur like captured starlight, the shadow runes writhing with prophetic fire. She was still small, still young, but the force of her presence brought every wolf to their knees, some in reverence, others in fear, all in recognition of something greater than their petty territories and blood feuds. Kael felt his curse marks ignite with searing intensity, but this time there was no pain, only light, pure and cleansing, as Morgana's spell completed its purpose. The marks that had tormented him for months shattered like glass, cascading off his skin in brilliant fragments that dissolved into moonlight. The witch's final magic had fulfilled its promise. The heir was revealed. The guardian had made his choice, and the curse transformed into blessing. Kael fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as 53 years of trapped magic released in a single moment. He felt Morgana's presence like a whisper on the wind, gratitude, pride, and the fierce love of a bloodline that had survived against impossible odds. Duskfang's voice rang out across the stunned assembly. Bear witness. I name Kael as Ember's chosen guardian until she reaches her majority. Any who threaten her, threaten me. Any who harm her, declare war on every pack that honors the ancient laws. Ember completed her shift and padded over to where Kael knelt. She was still small, still the pup he'd saved from the cursed woods, but her silver eyes held the weight of prophecy and promise. Gently, she placed one paw on his bowed head, not in dominance, but in blessing. In that moment, Kael understood. True guardianship wasn't about possession. It was about standing beside someone as they discovered who they were meant to be, even when it terrified you. Especially when it terrified you. The convergence moon blazed overhead, and for the first time since his exile, Kael felt no curse, no shame, no worthlessness. Only purpose, fierce and true, burning in his chest, where the broken pieces of his heart had reformed into something stronger. He had let go, and in letting go, he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Redemption wasn't about being saved. It was about choosing to save others, even when it cost you everything. Especially then.
This is it. Kael sacrificed everything for Ember's freedom, but the biggest question still remains unanswered. When Ember comes of age, will she choose unity or vengeance? Will she forgive the packs who slaughtered her family in cold blood, or will she burn their world to ashes? I need your prediction in the comments below. Unity or vengeance? Choose one. And if you watch this entire story without subscribing, you're making a huge mistake. Hit that subscribe button right now because I'm bringing you more epic tales of magic, betrayal, and impossible choices. Don't miss out. Subscribe today.